Sometimes the loneliest table in the room isn't the one with a single plate. It's the one with an empty chair that no one has dared to touch for years. On a chilly Friday evening in downtown Chicago, the city's finest restaurant glowed with golden light while soft piano music drifted beneath crystal chandeliers. Couples toasted anniversaries. Families laughed over warm bread and steaming bowls of lobster bisque. Friends celebrated promotions with glasses raised high. Every table seemed wrapped in conversation, every smile reflected in polished windows overlooking the river. Every table except one. Near the floor-to-ceiling glass sat Nathan Carter, the 43-year-old CEO whose name appeared on magazine covers more often than he appeared at home. His tailored charcoal suit fit perfectly, his silver watch caught the candlelight with effortless elegance, and every employee in the restaurant knew better than to interrupt him unless absolutely necessary. Yet despite the wealth surrounding him, despite the flawless service and the breathtaking skyline stretching beyond the glass, Nathan looked like a man carrying a silence too heavy for anyone else to hear. Before him rested 2 dinner menus. 2 glasses of sparkling water. 2 neatly folded linen napkins. 2 place settings prepared with identical care. But only one seat was occupied. Across from him, the second chair remained perfectly empty, exactly as it had every Friday night for the past 3 years. Waiters had stopped asking whether someone else would be joining him. New employees learned quickly never to remove the untouched plate until Nathan quietly nodded at the end of every meal. No one knew why the chair stayed there. No one ever asked. Nathan unfolded his napkin with practiced precision and stared through the window instead of at the filet mignon cooling slowly before. For several long seconds, Nathan could not answer. The little girl's question drifted through the quiet space between them, simple enough for any child to ask, yet heavy enough to reach a place inside him he had spent years carefully locking away. His fingers remained wrapped around the silver fork, but he no longer remembered picking it up. Around them, conversations resumed, glasses clinked softly, and waiters moved gracefully between tables, unaware that one innocent sentence had completely changed the rhythm of a man's carefully controlled evening. The girl lowered her eyes, suddenly worried she might have broken an invisible rule. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I thought maybe empty chairs get lonely too." Nathan blinked, forcing himself back into the present. It had been a very long time since anyone had spoken to him without recognizing his title first. No one had called him Mr. in years. To most people he was Mr. Carter, Chief Executive Officer Carter, or simply the billionaire whose companies stretched across half the country. Yet this child looked at him as though none of those things mattered. She only saw a man sitting across from an empty chair. Nathan slowly set the fork onto the plate. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. "Lucy," she answered with a gentle smile. "Lucy Bennett." "Lucy," he repeated, almost as if testing whether the name belonged inside the silence surrounding his table. "Do your parents know where you are?" She nodded without hesitation. "My mommy knows I like talking to people who look lonely." Nathan studied her more carefully. Her cream-colored coat had been neatly stitched at one sleeve where it had once torn. The buttons did not match, but each had been sewn on with patient hands. Her shoes were polished despite showing signs of many seasons of use. Nothing about her suggested neglect. Everything suggested someone doing the very best they could with very little. A waiter hurried toward the table, clearly alarmed by the unexpected guest. "Sir, I apologize. We did not realize." Nathan gently lifted one hand before the young man could finish. "It is all right," he said calmly. "Please bring another dinner menu." The waiter hesitated for only a moment before nodding respectfully and disappearing into the dining room. Lucy's blue eyes grew wide. "Really?" she asked. "I can stay?" Nathan surprised himself with the answer. "For dinner, yes." Her smile arrived slowly, not exploding with excitement but unfolding with quiet gratitude, as though she had learned not to expect good things too quickly. She rested both hands on the edge of the table and looked toward the window where snow continued falling across the city lights. "Thank you," she said softly. "It feels warmer when someone sits across from you." Nathan felt something unfamiliar stir inside him. Not joy. Not happiness. Just the faintest crack in a wall that had stood untouched for years. The second menu arrived moments later, placed gently before Lucy beside the untouched water glass that had always belonged to someone else. She opened it carefully, studying every page with remarkable seriousness before looking back up at Nathan. "Everything looks delicious," she admitted with a tiny laugh. "But could I please order something small?" Nathan tilted his head. "You do not have to worry about the price." Lucy smiled again, this time with surprising wisdom. "I am not worried about the price. Mommy says when someone shares their table with you, the kindest thing you can do is leave room for another blessing to come later." Nathan had spent decades negotiating billion-dollar agreements, yet somehow nothing anyone had ever said inside a boardroom carried half the weight of that little sentence. Lucy chose a simple bowl of tomato soup and half of a grilled cheese sandwich, thanking the waiter as though he had personally prepared the meal just for her. Nathan noticed the young server smile on his way back to the kitchen. Somehow the atmosphere around the table had changed. People who walked past no longer glanced at the famous businessman sitting alone. They smiled at the sight of a little girl swinging her feet beneath the oversized chair while studying the tiny candle flickering between them. For reasons Nathan could not explain, he no longer minded being watched. The soup arrived first, filling the air with the comforting scent of basil and warm bread. Lucy waited patiently until Nathan nodded before picking up her spoon. She closed her eyes after the first taste and smiled with genuine delight. "This tastes like home," she whispered. Nathan looked at his untouched steak before quietly setting the knife aside. "Is it really that good?" Lucy nodded enthusiastically. "Food always tastes better when someone sits with you." Nathan surprised himself by taking another bite of his own dinner. It was the first time in months that he actually noticed the flavor. For a while they ate in peaceful silence, not the uncomfortable silence Nathan knew so well, but the kind that existed between people who did not feel pressured to fill every second with words. Outside, snow continued drifting over Michigan Avenue, covering rooftops and sidewalks with soft white blankets while the city lights shimmered beneath the falling flakes. Lucy eventually looked around the elegant dining room with wide eyes filled more with curiosity than envy. "Do you come here every week?" she asked. Nathan nodded. "Every Friday." "Because you like the food?" she asked. He looked toward the empty place sitting across from him before answering. "I used to come here with someone who did." Lucy did not ask another question. Instead, she reached for the basket of warm bread resting between them. She carefully broke one dinner roll in half, placed one piece on her own plate, then gently set the other onto the untouched bread plate across the table. Nathan watched every movement. "Why did you do that?" he asked softly. Lucy shrugged as though the answer was obvious. "Nobody should have an empty plate if everyone else gets bread." Nathan felt his throat tighten. He looked at the small piece of bread resting where no one had placed food for 3 long years. Not even the restaurant staff had ever touched that plate. Yet somehow this child had done it naturally, without pity, without ceremony, simply because kindness made sense to her. After another quiet moment, Lucy reached into the pocket of her coat and carefully unfolded a slightly worn paper napkin. Inside rested a tiny sugar cookie shaped like a star, decorated with white icing that had cracked during the cold walk. She held it with both hands as though it were something precious. "Mommy baked this yesterday," she explained. "She always says dessert tastes sweeter when you split it with someone." Nathan smiled before he realized he was smiling. It was small and unfamiliar, almost awkward, but it was real. Lucy immediately noticed. "There it is," she said happily. Nathan frowned. "What?" She pointed gently toward his face. "Your smile." I thought maybe it was hiding because it had been alone for too long. Nathan lowered his eyes, unable to remember the last time anyone had spoken to him with such innocent honesty. Somewhere deep inside, beneath years of grief, endless meetings, quiet apartments, and carefully guarded routines, something fragile had begun to awaken, and for the first time in a very long while, the empty chair across from him no longer felt like the only thing waiting at the table. Nathan looked at the tiny star-shaped cookie resting between them, its cracked white icing catching the candlelight like fresh snow beneath a winter moon. Lucy carefully broke it into 2 uneven pieces, then quietly pushed the larger one toward him without saying a word. He laughed softly. "That is not exactly equal." She smiled, brushing a loose strand of golden hair behind her ear. "Mommy says when you share with someone who has been sad for a long time, they probably need the bigger piece." Nathan shook his head, almost forgetting who he was supposed to be. In boardrooms, every percentage mattered. Every contract was measured, negotiated, and balanced down to the smallest detail. Yet this little girl measured generosity with an entirely different scale. He accepted the cookie, taking a careful bite. It tasted of vanilla, cinnamon, and something even rarer than expensive ingredients. It tasted homemade. It tasted remembered. Lucy watched him hopefully. "Is it good?" Nathan nodded. "It is one of the best desserts I have ever had." Her face brightened with quiet pride. "Mommy will be happy to hear that." For a moment they simply enjoyed the peaceful rhythm of the evening. The pianist shifted into a gentle melody that drifted across the dining room, wrapping every table in warmth. Outside, snow continued falling, softening the sharp edges of the city until everything beyond the glass looked almost dreamlike. Nathan noticed Lucy tapping her fingers lightly against the edge of the table in time with the music. "Do you play piano?" he asked. She giggled. "No. But Mommy says every song has a heartbeat if you listen carefully enough." Nathan listened. For years he had heard only background noise inside restaurants like this. Tonight he heard every note. Every pause. Every breath between the melodies. It felt strangely familiar, as though life itself had been speaking softly around him all along while he remained too busy to notice. Lucy suddenly tilted her head. "Can I ask you something?" Nathan nodded. "You can ask me anything." She pointed toward the untouched water glass that still rested beside the empty place setting. "Do you still pour water because you hope someone might come?" Nathan stared at the glass. His answer refused to arrive immediately. Finally he whispered, "Maybe I do." Lucy did not respond with sympathy. She simply smiled with the peaceful certainty only children sometimes possess. "Hope is not a silly thing," she said. "Mommy says hope is like leaving the porch light on. Sometimes the person you are waiting for does not come back, but someone else who needs the light might find their way home." Nathan lowered his eyes as her words settled deep inside him. He remembered another voice saying something remarkably similar years before. Emily had always insisted on leaving one light glowing in the front window whenever he traveled. She used to laugh and say that warm lights helped lost hearts find their way. He had not thought about that little habit in years. His apartment had remained dark every night since she was gone. Before he realized what he was doing, Nathan reached across the table and gently straightened the folded linen napkin resting before Lucy. She looked up at him with grateful eyes, and for the briefest moment the distance between millionaire and child disappeared completely. They were simply 2 people sharing dinner on a snowy evening, each quietly giving the other something they had not realized they were missing. Nathan glanced once more at the butterfly-shaped birthmark on Lucy's left wrist as she reached for her spoon, and a faint, impossible feeling stirred inside him, not because he recognized the mark itself, but because it awakened a memory that had been sleeping patiently in the deepest corner of his heart, waiting for exactly the right moment to return. The waiter quietly cleared the dinner plates, leaving only the candle, the untouched piece of bread across the table, and the tiny crumbs from the star-shaped cookie that neither of them seemed ready to brush away. Nathan leaned back for the first time that evening, noticing how different the restaurant suddenly felt. It was still elegant. Still filled with polished silver and soft conversation. Yet somehow it no longer seemed as cold as it had when he walked in an hour earlier. Lucy wrapped both hands around her warm cup of hot chocolate, letting the rising steam warm her face before taking a careful sip. She smiled with quiet satisfaction. "This is Mommy's favorite drink," she said. Nathan looked at her gently. "Does she come here with you?" Lucy shook her head. "No. She gets tired very easily now." Nathan waited, sensing she wanted to continue without feeling rushed. Children, he remembered, often shared their biggest truths only after they felt completely safe. Lucy traced tiny circles on the edge of her cup with one finger. "We stay at the Maple Grove Motor Lodge a few blocks from here. It is not fancy, but the lady at the front desk puts extra marshmallows in my hot chocolate whenever she can." Nathan nodded quietly. He knew the motel by name. It was one of the oldest buildings still standing on the west side of the city. "Does your mother work?" he asked carefully. Lucy smiled with unmistakable pride. "She used to paint pictures. Really beautiful ones. She says colors can make people feel brave." Her smile softened. "But she has been sick for a long time now, so painting makes her very tired." Nathan felt his chest grow heavier. "Is someone helping the two of you?" Lucy gave a thoughtful little shrug. "Sometimes neighbors help. Sometimes the church brings groceries. Sometimes Mommy sells one of her paintings. We always have enough." She paused before adding with quiet honesty, "Some weeks are just smaller than others." Nathan lowered his eyes toward the folded napkin resting beside his plate. He had spent years studying financial reports worth hundreds of millions of dollars, yet the phrase "some weeks are just smaller than others" somehow explained hardship with more grace than any business presentation ever could. Lucy looked out through the window where families hurried beneath umbrellas and winter coats. "Every Friday Mommy asks me to take a little walk before dinner," she explained. "She tells me to look for someone eating all alone." Nathan listened without interrupting. "Then what?" Lucy smiled exactly the way someone smiles while repeating words they treasure. "She says, find the person who looks sadder than we are. Sit with them if they let you. Loneliness gets lighter when somebody carries a little piece of it." Nathan felt the words settle into every silent Friday he had spent staring across that empty chair. "Have you done this before?" he asked softly. Lucy nodded. "A few times. Sometimes people are busy. Sometimes they say no. Sometimes they smile even if they do not invite me to sit down." She looked directly into his eyes with complete sincerity. "Tonight I thought you looked like you had been waiting longer than anyone else." Nathan could not answer. The candle flickered gently between them, reflecting in the untouched water glass across the table, and for the first time in 3 years he began to wonder whether the chair had never truly been waiting for the past at all. Perhaps, without realizing it, it had been patiently saving a place for Hope to arrive wearing a little cream-colored coat and a butterfly-shaped birthmark. The restaurant had begun to empty by the time Nathan asked for the check, but neither of them seemed eager for the evening to end. The pianist quietly packed away sheet music while employees dimmed a few of the lights, leaving the dining room wrapped in an even softer glow. Lucy slipped carefully from the chair and reached for her little coat. As she pulled the sleeve over her left hand, the fabric caught for just a second, exposing the butterfly-shaped birthmark more clearly than before. Nathan's eyes rested on it almost without thinking. Something inside him stirred, not recognition of the mark itself, but recognition of the feeling it carried. It reminded him of another winter evening. Many years ago. Emily had been standing by the kitchen window, sleeves rolled up while baking sugar cookies shaped like stars. Flour covered the counter, cinnamon filled the house, and she had laughed after accidentally dusting his suit jacket with powdered sugar. She had reached across the table, taken his wrist, and traced a tiny butterfly with her fingertip. Butterflies remind me that hearts are allowed to change, she had whispered. People think they are symbols of endings, but they are really symbols of becoming someone new. Nathan had laughed back then, telling her butterflies had no place in the world of business. Emily only smiled and replied, that is because business counts profits. Love counts transformations. The memory arrived so vividly that Nathan almost forgot where he was standing. Lucy noticed his expression. Are you all right? She asked gently. He nodded slowly. You reminded me of someone very important. Lucy smiled with quiet understanding instead of curiosity. That happens sometimes. As they walked together toward the restaurant entrance, Nathan noticed a small display near the hostess stand filled with handwritten thank you notes from guests collected over the years. Lucy stopped to admire them. I like reading happy words, she said. They stay inside your heart longer than sad ones. Nathan watched her carefully. Everything she said sounded simple, yet somehow each sentence uncovered another forgotten corner of his own life. When they stepped outside, crisp winter air greeted them, carrying gentle snowflakes that floated beneath the glowing streetlights. Nathan's driver had already pulled the black sedan to the curb, but Nathan remained standing beside Lucy instead of opening the door. May I take you back to your mother? He asked. Lucy looked relieved rather than surprised. She will like meeting you. Nathan smiled softly. You sound very certain. Lucy looked toward the quiet street before answering. Mommy says you can tell what kind of person someone is by how they treat an empty chair. Some people only see furniture. Other people see memories. Nathan felt the words settle over him like the falling snow. Emily had once said something almost identical after inviting an elderly stranger to share their Thanksgiving table years ago. He had forgotten the conversation until this very moment. Before either of them climbed into the car, Lucy reached into her coat pocket once more. She carefully unfolded a tiny piece of paper that had been creased many times. On it, drawn in colored pencil, was a butterfly resting beside an empty chair beneath a glowing window. Across the bottom, written in careful childish handwriting, were the words, "There is always room for one more heart." Nathan stared at the drawing in complete silence. He did not know why tears threatened the corners of his eyes. He only knew that somewhere between the untouched bread, the shared cookie, the empty chair, and the little butterfly sketched on ordinary paper, the life he had believed was permanently frozen had begun, almost imperceptibly, to thaw. The drive across the city was quiet, but it was not the kind of silence Nathan had carried for years. This silence breathed. Lucy sat in the back seat beside him, carefully holding the little drawing of the butterfly and the empty chair in her lap as though it were something too important to fold away. Every few minutes she looked through the window, smiling whenever she spotted Christmas lights hanging from balconies or wrapped around neighborhood trees. Mommy says people decorate houses because hope likes to know where to land, she said softly. Nathan found himself looking out as well, noticing details he had ignored for countless winters. Children building uneven snowmen. Neighbors waving across sidewalks. Warm windows glowing against the cold night. Success had taught him how to notice skyscrapers. Lucy was teaching him how to notice homes. 20 minutes later the black sedan pulled into the parking lot of the Maple Grove Motor Lodge. The building showed its age, but someone had carefully swept the front walkway, and a strand of colorful lights framed the office window. Lucy smiled. See? Mrs. Jenkins always keeps the lights on. Nathan stepped out first and walked around to open Lucy's door. She slipped her small hand into his without hesitation as they crossed the lot together. It was such a simple gesture that Nathan barely realized how naturally he accepted it. Room 112 sat near the end of the first floor. Lucy knocked twice before opening the door. Mommy, I am home. A gentle voice answered almost immediately. Come in, sweetheart. Nathan paused respectfully at the doorway until Lucy turned back with an encouraging smile. You can come too. Inside, the room was small but remarkably warm. A tiny artificial Christmas tree stood on a wooden table decorated with handmade paper ornaments. Paintbrushes rested neatly inside an old coffee mug beside several unfinished watercolor paintings leaning carefully against the wall. The woman sitting beneath a knitted blanket looked tired, but her eyes were kind, carrying the quiet strength of someone who had chosen gratitude over bitterness many times. "You must be Nathan," she said with a welcoming smile before he had the chance to introduce himself. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. She laughed gently. Lucy has always been very good at reading people. When she believes someone needs company, she usually comes home with an interesting story. Lucy sat beside her mother and leaned gently against her shoulder. "He smiled tonight," she announced proudly. A real smile. The woman looked at Nathan with understanding that required no explanation. "Then thank you for letting my little girl borrow a few minutes of your evening." Nathan slowly shook his head. "I think I am the one who borrowed something." His eyes wandered toward one of the unfinished paintings resting near the window. It showed a quiet restaurant beneath falling snow. Inside, one table held 2 glowing candles and an empty chair waiting patiently beside them. A single butterfly rested on the windowsill outside. Nathan stepped closer, unable to look away. "This is beautiful," he whispered. The woman smiled. "I painted that after losing someone important. I promised myself I would never paint empty chairs as symbols of loss again. They are invitations." Nathan turned back toward her. "Invitations?" She nodded. "Every empty chair gives kindness one more place to sit." The room fell peacefully silent. Nathan looked at Lucy, then at the painting, then at the tiny Christmas tree glowing softly in the corner. In that ordinary motel room, surrounded by simple things made extraordinary through love, he quietly made a decision that would change far more than one evening. Before leaving, he looked at Lucy's mother and said with complete sincerity, "Tomorrow morning, if you will allow me, I would like to help. Not because I am a chief executive officer. Not because I have money. Simply because no family should have to carry hope all by themselves." The next morning arrived wrapped in pale winter sunlight that spilled across the city like a quiet promise. True to his word, Nathan returned to the Maple Grove Motor Lodge before 8 o'clock carrying 3 cups of hot chocolate and a small paper bag from the same bakery that had once made Emily's favorite cinnamon rolls. Lucy opened the door before he even knocked. "Mommy," she called with a bright smile, "I told you he would come back." Nathan realized how much faith those simple words carried. Somewhere along the way, this little girl had decided that people could keep their promises, even after life had given her every reason to believe otherwise. Lucy's mother welcomed him inside with gentle gratitude. They shared breakfast around the tiny wooden table while morning light reflected across unfinished paintings leaning against the walls. Nathan listened as she spoke about her artwork, her dream of opening a neighborhood studio where children could paint without worrying whether they could afford supplies, and the way Lucy loved mixing colors because she believed every shade deserved another beside it. Before leaving, Nathan quietly handed her the name of a physician he trusted completely, one whose kindness matched his remarkable skill. "He is expecting your call," Nathan said softly. "Every appointment has already been arranged." She looked at him with surprise. "You did all of this overnight?" Nathan smiled. Some things should never have to wait. Over the weeks that followed, Friday evenings slowly became something entirely different. Nathan no longer arrived at the restaurant carrying only silence. Lucy and her mother joined him whenever they could, and the staff soon began preparing 3 place settings instead of 2. The untouched bread plate was no longer left untouched. Fresh flowers appeared in the center of the table. Even the pianist seemed to play brighter melodies whenever the little girl walked through the dining room waving happily at every familiar face. Nathan found himself laughing more often than he had in years. He learned that Lucy always folded her napkin into tiny butterflies before dessert. She learned that Nathan could never resist extra whipped cream on hot chocolate, no matter how much he insisted otherwise. One snowy evening, the restaurant manager approached their table carrying a small wooden plaque polished to a warm shine. "Mr. Carter," he said with a smile, "our staff has been talking. This table has become something special to many of us." He carefully placed the plaque beside the candle. Carved into the wood were simple words that made Nathan's eyes glisten. "The empty chair table." Beneath the title appeared one quiet sentence. "Leave one seat open. Someone may need kindness tonight." Nathan looked across the table at Lucy, who was already smiling as though she had expected this all along. "I like that," she whispered. "Now the chair belongs to everybody." The tradition spread without anyone planning it. Some evenings an elderly widower accepted an invitation to share dessert. Another week a young nurse finishing a long hospital shift joined them for coffee before heading home. Once, a college student far from family during the holidays found unexpected laughter around that little table beside the window. Nathan noticed something remarkable. Every person who accepted the invitation left lighter than they had arrived. So did he. Months later, as spring quietly replaced winter, Lucy's mother returned to painting with renewed strength, filling canvas after canvas with warm windows, glowing tables, butterflies, and ordinary people choosing one another over loneliness. Nathan purchased every piece she finished, not to store them away inside his office, but to hang them throughout the hospitals, schools, and community centers his company supported. Beneath each painting rested the same simple message that had quietly transformed his own life. There is always room for one more heart. 20 years passed more quietly than Nathan Carter ever imagined possible. Success still followed his name, but people who truly knew him no longer measured his life by companies, awards, or headlines. They measured it by Friday evenings. Every Friday, without exception, he walked through the doors of the same restaurant where one impossible dinner had rewritten the direction of his heart. The table beside the window remained exactly where it had always been. The candle still flickered. Fresh bread still arrived before every meal. And one chair always remained empty, waiting with quiet purpose. It had become one of Chicago's favorite traditions. Some guests called ahead asking if the empty chair table was available because they hoped to share a meal with someone who needed company. Others simply left handwritten notes beneath the wooden plaque, thanking strangers they would probably never meet again. The restaurant kept every one of those notes inside a leather book resting behind the hostess stand. On one bright spring evening, Nathan paused before entering, his silver hair catching the golden light of sunset. Beside him walked Dr. Lucy Bennett, now a compassionate pediatrician whose calm smile still carried the same warmth it had when she was 7 years old. The butterfly-shaped birthmark remained visible on her left wrist whenever she rolled up her sleeves to comfort frightened children, and many of her youngest patients believed it was a lucky butterfly that helped people heal faster. Nathan secretly hoped they were right. Across town, Lucy's mother had fulfilled her dream years earlier by opening a neighborhood art studio where every child painted for free. The walls overflowed with butterflies, glowing windows, shared tables, and empty chairs that somehow never looked lonely. Every Friday evening she still joined them whenever her schedule allowed, carrying homemade desserts that disappeared almost as quickly as they reached the table. As Nathan and Lucy settled into their familiar seats, a young hostess quietly placed 3 menus on the table before hesitating beside the final chair. "Should I remove this one?" she asked politely, still new enough not to know the tradition. Nathan smiled gently before Lucy answered. "Please leave it exactly where it is." The hostess nodded and walked away. A few minutes later the front door opened, and a little boy around 8 years old stepped uncertainly inside holding a library book against his chest. He looked around the busy restaurant, clearly searching for somewhere to belong. Lucy noticed him first. Without exchanging a single word, she reached across the table and gently pulled the empty chair back from its place. The soft sound of wood sliding across polished floor echoed exactly as it had all those years before. The little boy looked up, surprised. Lucy smiled with the same peaceful confidence she had carried since childhood. Would you like to have dinner with us? She asked. The boy hesitated before slowly walking over. Are you sure? He whispered. Nathan looked at the child, then at the empty chair that had once represented everything he believed he had lost. Absolutely, he said warmly. This seat has been waiting for you. The boy smiled as he climbed into the chair, and in that quiet moment Nathan glanced toward the window where evening light reflected softly against the glass. For just an instant he thought of Emily, of star-shaped cookies, butterflies, warm porch lights, and the promise that empty chairs were never meant to honor endings. They existed to welcome new beginnings. Nathan reached for the basket of fresh bread, broke one roll in half, and placed the larger piece on the little boy's plate. Lucy laughed softly, recognizing the gesture immediately. Nothing truly beautiful had ended that snowy night so many years ago. It had simply found another heart willing to carry it forward. Because true wealth was never counted in dollars, towers, or titles. It was measured one empty chair, one shared meal, and one act of kindness at a time.